The attitude of Hitler and the Nazis to many races was extremely negative, up to the ideas of their destruction. If a lot has been said about anti-Semitism, then less is said about Hitler's hatred of the Slavs. And in this video we will talk about why Hitler did not like the Slavs. It's worth mentioning right away that Hitler's attitude towards the Slavs changed over time, unlike the same Jews, whom Hitler considered an inferior race even before coming to power. Moreover, three Slavic countries fought on Hitler's side: Bulgaria, puppet Slovakia, and Croatia. Hitler had no complaints about the peoples of these countries. Let's start with the first reason that influenced Hitler when he was still young. This is an anti-Slavic sentiment among Germans who lived in Austria-Hungary. As many people know, Hitler was born in Austria-Hungary and spent a significant part of his life in this country, all his childhood and youth. That is the most important periods in life when views and worldviews are formed. Among the Germans living in Austria-Hungary, these Slavic views were quite widespread, which also passed on to Hitler. Why did this happen? Already closer to the second half of the 19th century, Austria-Hungary was experiencing more and more problems on both an economic and social political nature. The most important issue of the country at that time was the national question. The Austrian Empire was inhabited by dozens of peoples, which is why it's called the Patchwork Empire. Slavic peoples made up a significant part of the population, including Czechs, Serbs, Croats, Poles, Ukrainians, Slovaks, and Slovenes. From the beginning of the spring in the regions where the Slavs live, mass uprisings and revolutions began, which however were successfully suppressed by the Austrian authorities. The Slavic peoples tried for independence and wanted to separate and subsequently break Austria-Hungary apart. It was because of these events that the Austrian Germans, who make up the backbone of the empire, began to treat the Slavs with a negative attitude, because they wanted the collapse of their homeland. In general, such views were shared by Hitler. By the way, this is why he volunteered for the German army with the outbreak of the First World War, because he did not want to serve with the Slavs, in particular with the Czechs, to whom Hitler had a personal dislike. In general, among the Germans of Austria-Hungary, there was a certain envy towards the German Empire, since it was a purely German state without pronounced minorities. At the same time, ideas about the unity of two empires appeared, the German and the Austro-Hungarian one. Generally speaking, the environment where Hitler grew up was quite hostile to the Slavic population, because Hitler was always skeptical of the Slavs. And with the coming to power and with the beginning of the war, hostility towards them only increased. The second reason is the First World War. The World War was started precisely because of the precedent when the Serbian nationalist Gavrilo Princip killed the Austrian heir to the throne, Franz Ferdinand. In addition, in the First World War, many Slavic countries opposed the war against Germany and Austria-Hungary, excluding Bulgaria. Serbs, Russians, Ukrainians, Poles turned out to be warring nations in this war. Moreover, some Slavs of the Austria-Hungarian Empire opposed it. The same Czechoslovak Corps, being part of the Russian army, fought against the Germans. Despite the fact that thousands of Slavs still gave their lives for Austria-Hungary, there was a negative image of the Slavs for the German population. Plus, the results of the First World War also did not please Hitler much. Germany was defeated, Austria-Hungary collapsed, and many lands inhabited by Germans just fell into the Slavic countries, for example, Poland and Czechoslovakia. In general, it's worth noting that a certain confrontation between the Slavic and German wars appeared with the emergence of the concept of Pan-Germanism and Pan-Slavism, which assumes the unity of the German or Slavic peoples into a single country. A number of territorial and ideological problems arose in this shoulder, because both Pan-Slavists and Pan-Germanists acted as opponents in the struggle for the implementation of their plans. In general, the rooting into Hitler's consciousness that the Slavs are enemies also happened thanks to the First World War. The third reason is Hitler's concept of expanding the living space for the German people. The living space was planned to expand thanks to the seizure of the lands of Eastern Europe and the relocation of Germans to these lands. The plan assumes the displacement of indigenous peoples who were mainly Slavs. The concept assumed that without the expansion of space to the east, the German nation would die out, and thanks to the eastern lands, it would be able to expand its influence and population. Again, the main problem of this plan was the local population, mainly Slavs. According to the General Plan Ost, residents of the Soviet Union and Poland were supposed to be deported in mass to Siberia, and their liquidation was also supposed. A small part of the Slavic population would still remain on these lands, but would act as slaves to serve the German population, which should move to these lands, while an extremely small part who had Aryan blood was planned to be Germanized. The plan was partially implemented with the occupation of these lands. Part of the local population was starved. There was even a plan with the name Hunger Plan. The other part was transported to Europe for slave labor in German industry. It's worth noting that in addition to the inhabitants of the Soviet Union and Poland, there were similar plans for a number of other Slavs. There was a plan for the final solution of the Czech question. The plan was similar to the aforementioned Ost plan. The Czechs were supposed to be deported to Siberia, some destroyed, and a small part Germanized. The lands of the Czech Republic were also planned to be populated by Germans and completely Germanize the region. As we can see, the Slavs contradicted Hitler's global plans to establish world order and expand living space. Well, the last reason will be the racial issue, with which not everything is so clear. Initially, the Nazis did not have any clear position regarding the Slavic population. A number of Nazis considered the Slavs as potential allies. Some became ones, while others were an inferior race, interfering with the German nation. The attitude towards the Slavic peoples of the top of the Third Reich began to deteriorate with the beginning of the World War II, when mass repressions against the Slavic population were involved. In the end, Nazi dogmatic, not finding a clear answer to the Slavic question, began to declare that it's impossible to equate all Slavic peoples with one race, and some Slavs generally have Aryan blood. It was planned to Germanize them after the seizure of the territory. In general, the Slavic question was extremely flexible in Germany. If it's necessary to attract collaborators to the service, then the Slavs are German people and sort of with Aryan blood. But if it's necessary to justify their elimination, then this is an inferior race and so on. Here again it's worth mentioning Hitler's allied Slavic countries, namely Bulgaria, Croatia, and Slovakia. Hitler treated them quite favorably. The peoples inhabiting these lands considered Aryan blood. In fact, Hitler was simply not particularly interested in these lands, and the Balkans in general, according to the plans of the Nazis, was supposed to move in the Italian sphere of influence. This is why the Nazis did not show any claims against Bulgarians and Croats. As we can see, the Nazis did not have a clear racial understanding of Slavism. Summing up, we can say that Hitler hated the Slavs and tried to eliminate them because of his plans for a German living space in the East, which was supposed to ensure the survival of the German nation. Anti-Slavic sentiments appeared in Hitler long before his political ambitions and were formed because of the hostile attitude toward them among the Austrian Germans.